Hello and welcome to Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I'm going to carry on with my defending the indefensible. I was challenged to talk about Mallick Rel. And in order to do this, I will be making some reference to The God is Not Willing, because that's set after the Malazan Book of the Fallen, so we can deal with some of the stuff that's there. But in terms of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, it's basically, I think, after Bone Hunters. Bone Hunters is kind of the cutoff point, and also some aspects of Return of the Crimson Guard. But in general, I'm going to be talking about Mallick Rel more in general, rather than picking out specific aspects. It's more to do with who he is as a character, what he does, how that's represented, and how we as readers perceive various aspects of it. Because just like with the Kallor video, the focus of this is not so much that these characters are good or redeemable or trying to justify their actions. The focus of this sort of thing is actually about reader understanding and reader perception, and how we come to conclusions about characters, how we judge characters, not necessarily on their actions, but how their actions are framed and the context in which we get the information, and also the fact that some information is going to be withheld. Now, a lot of the stuff about Mallick Rel may be addressed in the forthcoming Ian C. Esslemont novel, Forge of the High Mage. It was, I think the working title of it was The Gistal, which is going to suggest something that may involve Mallick Rel. So some of what I say may be proven or disproven in the future, but I'm sticking to basically up until the end of the Bone Hunters, some references taken from The God is Not Willing and the Return of the Crimson Guard. So those are the books that, if you don't want any spoilers of at all, see you in the next one. If you're okay with spoilers on this, let's talk about Mallick Rel. Mallick Rel the Merciful. And remember, Mallick Rel the Merciful. Oh, the propagandist attitude of that is just, it's so well done. We first encounter Mallick Rel very early on in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because he's part of Deadhouse Gates. He's part of that whole whirlwind rebellion stuff that's going on. And because of that, he is seen very much as an antagonist to the characters that we are following. So he is initially framed in a very negative light. And because of that, that is something that is very difficult to overcome in narrative terms. Think about Anomander Rake in Gardens of the Moon. Anomander Rake is initially focused on as an antagonist, as fighting the people that we are following along with. Even the Darujhistan sort of crew that we see in Gardens of the Moon, again, are seen as enemies of the Malazan. And one of the difficulties that people have, obviously, with the first book is they don't know who to root for. We have this locked into our heads that there will be two sides. There's the good side and the bad side, the goodies and the baddies, good versus evil, this nice, simplistic binary. And yet one of the clear goals of Erikson's writing, and a lot of what Esslemont explores as well, is that it is so rare to have something that clear cut. And Mallick Rel, I think, is a great example of this, because we can approach Mallick Rel as, is he a nice person? Is he a good person? And I think the clear answer to that is nope. Nope, he's a miserable attempt at a human being. He is evil, he is manipulative, he squanders other, well, no, I wouldn't say he squanders. He places a certain value on people's lives according to how useful they are to him and to further his goals. He's incredibly goal-oriented with no consideration of friendship, loyalty, any other petty human concerns. And that really classes him as an evil, miserable, horrible, disgusting human being. And it's even funny that the Victorian sort of concept of physiognomy, this idea of your moral virtue being seen physically, being made manifest, we can see clearly used with the descriptions of Mallick Rel with his green teeth and the fact that he has a bulbous stomach, and none of this is described flatteringly. He's always described in negative, pejorative terms. So we frame him that way. We see him physically as something that is disgusting. We see his actions as something disgusting. And that is the position he occupies in the narrative as well. He is an antagonist to the people that we are emotionally invested in. So we view all of his actions from that perspective. Now, what's interesting about Mallick Rel, and this is actually quite different to the discussion I had about Kallor, is approaching it in thinking, okay, so we've talked about him as a person, as a character, but what about his role as a ruler? Because that's something slightly different. We have, I think, in our lives, experienced people who we go, they are remarkably good at their job. They're really good at their job. In fact, some of the qualities that they possess make them excellent at their job. It's just those qualities make them a miserable, awful human being. And this, I think, is a key to understanding Mallick Rel. And in order to talk about this, let's talk about the previous rulers of the Malazan Empire. Kellavend, everyone loves Kellavend. Well, apart from all of the nobles he had killed and all of the people that died in the wars that he started to expand his empire, and the people he generally killed off and massacred, and the cities that he took over, the regimes that he imposed that led to the deaths of thousands, if not millions of people. So like on the grand scheme of things, like Kellavend's not exactly a hero. He's not exactly good. He's not a paragon of virtue, but was he a good emperor? And he presided over the establishment of the empire, taking over an island, using that island to take over another country, using that basis to expand and expand and expand, all as part of whatever it was that he was doing. In fact, we kind of get the sense that the expansion of the empire was somewhat not the focus of what he was doing. It was more, oh, did that happen as well? I was over here doing this thing and accidentally conquered a new nation. That his goal was never the expansion of the empire. That just happened because of his other things that he was doing. And because of that, we can say, yes, he created the empire. He created and presided over a period of expansion. Does that make him a good ruler? And he was, by all accounts, a pretty terrible ruler. He had a close-knit group of friends, confidants, people who served him, who were loyal to him, and that's described as the family. But we can think of him very much as a mafia don. And yes, he expanded and did all of these things, but did he set up a cohesive, well put together empire? And the jury's kind of out on that, because from what we can tell from a lot of the books, what Kellavend did was take a whole load of territory and then go off on another adventure. He never ruled. He never set up the infrastructure and the administration and the bureaucracy to actually make the empire run. That was all handled by Surly or Laseen, in which case he was a pretty terrible ruler. He was actually really, really bad. And some of his tactics were incredibly brutal. He was the one that came up with killing all of the nobles and using that as a way to consolidate power in each of these different nations. Like, that's him. That's murder, like on a grand scale. Like, Kellavend's not a good guy, but we like Kellavend because he's funny and he's mad and he does entertaining things. And sometimes the results of what he is doing do have positive benefits, because like so many things, there can be positive benefits to horrendous, horrific acts. And then this brings us on to Laseen. Was Laseen a good empress? Was she a good ruler? Well, While Kellavend was off on these wild adventures, she was the one holding the empire together, almost with duct tape and string to try to keep everything ticking over. She was the one scrambling to pick up the pieces after Kellavend went and did another wild thing that resulted in oh, I need the army over here. She was the one behind the scenes making the logistics work. But when it comes to her being in charge, she was a great sort of second in command. But when she becomes the empress, suddenly a lot of her previous tactics will no longer work because she's front and center. She's used to working behind the scenes. And when you're front and center, you can't use those tactics anymore. Your hands are tied, or at least she believes her hands are tied in how she does things. And she suffers a number of setbacks where Kellavend was always supported by the family, all of these people who were loyal to him, or at least, came across as loyal. And they were very, very competent. When Laseen took over, her paranoia feared that they might take this power from her. And because of that, she didn't trust them. And ultimately, without going into details, she no longer had that framework, that supporting network of highly capable people to support her the way that Kellavend had. Kellavend could go and do something because he had backup in terms of this support network of incredibly talented, capable people who could make the craziness work. But Laseen isolated herself, was paranoid, and didn't have that. So she's functioning very much on her own and thinking that she can handle it on her own, but she doesn't trust anyone. She keeps trying to bring other people in and then see if they work out. She struggles with setting up a network of competent people. And that was a strength that Kellavend had, but also a weakness. So much of the empire depended on that group of people being able to drop everything to fix the problem that Kellavend had created. Laseen doesn't have that. And so we can see, even though she is a far more capable administrator than Kellavend ever was, she doesn't have the network in place to deal with these things. And this brings us on to Mallick Rel the Merciful. Mallick Rel understands the strengths and weaknesses of the Malazan Empire. He actively infiltrates and manipulates the strengths that Laseen has in order to turn them into weaknesses, and he exploits the weaknesses to give him an even stronger hand. Does he do this out of the goodness of his heart? No. Does he do this because of some altruistic reason that he can make the world a better place? No. He does it out of a sense of egotism, and he is brilliant. He is incredibly intelligent. He is incredibly manipulative. But the result of all of this is, even though he is a vile person, and even though he has all of these terrible personality traits, the hell of it all is, it makes him an incredibly effective emperor. And think about some of the rulers, famous rulers from the past: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar. If you met them today, they are not nice people. But in certain regards, they managed to be great rulers. Augustus in particular, Augustus was cruel and cold and logical. And this is, one of the reasons why when you look at the CEOs of some of the most powerful companies in the world, there's certainly quite a high percentage of them have or exhibit sociopathic tendencies, because they can make incredibly hard decisions without emotion that other people's lives they don't care about. They look at the problem, they solve the problem in a logical, easy way that does to generate the result that they want. And that makes them incredibly successful. It doesn't make them good people. But from the perspective of the company becomes more successful. So they are, from a certain regard, good CEOs. And this is the difficulty with someone like Mallick Rel. We can hate him, we can revile him, We can list all of his evil qualities, but when it comes to the empire, he's a better administrator and a better leader than Laseen and Kellavend, because he builds a team of people that he has pressure points on that he can manipulate. He understands the strengths and weaknesses of the empire. He knows if he distributes propaganda to sell a story to the masses, he can manipulate the masses into doing what he wants. He can control the empire. He can fix problems. He can institute the bureaucracies and the infrastructure necessary to make the empire function. Kellavend's unbridled sort of expansionist mindset is reined in. The paranoia established by Laseen is done away with, and Mallick Rel brings the empire back to a core, stabilizes it, and establishes it as something that has stability, structure, and he believes longevity. Kellavend focused too much on expansion, or even wasn't focused on it, it just happened. Laseen was too busy trying to pick up the pieces and organize things, and that allowed Mallick Rel to manipulate his way into this place. But Mallick Rel sees expansion isn't the issue. Too much expansion means that you just keep expanding and eventually that's going to run out, and that's bad. So he stops the expansion. He reduces the size of the military. He brings in a mixture, a greater emphasis on using majory, because that is the way forward. It's powerful. It makes his armed forces more powerful and more capable than anyone else. He organizes and builds on the military structures to create a professional mobile army that has more power, better training, better weapons than any other army. Mallick Rel focuses on trimming things down to their core and creating something powerful and stable out of it. And that makes him an exceptional ruler. It does not make him a nice person, doesn't make him a good person, it doesn't make him heroic. He is evil and manipulative and horrible, but he is incredibly effective, because when we think about it, the Malazan Empire is a dictatorship, and a dictator who is smart and cunning and incredibly intelligent and manipulative and understands how to use and harness all those things can be incredibly effective. So when we say, is he a good ruler? The ambiguity about what we mean by good is telling. He is not benevolent, but he is extraordinarily effective. And that, I think, is where we as readers have problems. We want, whether we admit it or not, we usually want the fairy tale ending. We want good to be rewarded. We want evil to be punished. We want the people who work hard and keep their nose down and put in the effort, for them to get good rewards. And those scheming, evil, manipulative people, we want them to be punished. That's how we feel a sense of justice should be applied. And when we see someone as slippery and as disgusting and as vile as Mallick Rel ascend to the highest levels of mundane power in this world, we feel an extraordinary sense of injustice. And that prejudices our evaluation of who he is and what he does. Because at the end of the day, he is actually a brilliant ruler. And that just leaves a bad taste in your mouth to admit it. Mallick Rel the Merciful is clearly propagandist, but look at what he achieves. He stabilizes the empire. He sets up, or he calls to an end a lot of the endless war. He capitalizes on the events around the world to consolidate his power and the empire's power. He sorts out and stops the droughts and the famines and the spread of disease. He institutes better infrastructure, better communication, better administration. Everything becomes much more ossified in a way, but structured and stable. For the first time in its history, the Malazan Empire becomes a stable political entity. And that is all due to Mallick Rel. They don't need to have all of these pogroms killing the nobles in order to maintain law and order. He institutes proper laws. So, is Mallick Rel a good person? No. Can we defend his actions? It depends on perspective. It depends on whether we take a utilitarian perspective. Is the greater good served by what he did? Or do we maintain, no, there is an objective morality here that he feels? It all depends on how we evaluate him, where we are evaluating him from, and what it is about him that we're evaluating. Mallick Rel is an odious, evil character. He's a brilliantly realized character. And he reflects this dichotomy that we have between what we like personally and what will be effective. So, is that defending the indefensible? Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. And I'll see you in the next one.